Picking up ace queen suited under the gun +1. Under the gun raises to 300 with a $49,000 stack. I could call or 3-bet. I 3-bet to 800 to deter people from calling behind me and playing in position. Small blind is a high stakes pro who's been on the vlog in the past. He knows that I don't normally play these stakes and puts in a cold 4-bet to 2600. If he's doing this for value, he's going to have hands that have me crushed like aces, kings, queens, and ace king. He shouldn't really be bluffing over an under the gun raise than an under the gun +1 3-bet. But maybe he occasionally is with a hand like ace-5 suited, perhaps something more creative. Under the gun folds, calling for 1800 more and playing an enormous pot with two cards that could be dominated doesn't sound too appealing. Ace-queen suited is too strong to let go of in position though. I call, we're heads up and what's already developing into what could be a huge hand. The flop is ace-9-3 with two clubs, we've got top pair. The action's on the small blind, I'm curious to see how he's going to play this. He bets 2500. It's just a slight down bet indicating that he's not afraid of the ace out there. No chance on ever folding. I call, somewhat hoping that the opponent will slow down on the turn because a pair of aces with a queen kicker isn't that great in a 4-bet pot if money continues to pile in on future streets. The turn is the 5 of clubs. It's a really bad card because the primary holding that I expect the opponent to be bluffing me with just made 2 pair. The flush draw also gets there, but I'm not very concerned about that given that the ace is a club. If the 9 was a club instead of the ace, I'd be way more worried that I'm drawing dead. The small blind continues with pressure and bets 5,000. I'm having flashbacks to when I lost a $60,000 pot and got stacked during the last time that I played stakes nearly this big. Should I be folding here? You'd think the small blind would pump the brakes with a hand like kings, queens, or jacks. Ace-king seems like the most likely hand that I'd be up against given how this has been played and how many combos of ace-king are possible for the opponent to have. If I call, I'll have 8,600 in my stack and the pot will be over $20,000. I don't see how I'd be able to fold to a non-club river for that amount. If by some chance I'm not already in terrible shape, even if my opponent has 1 club in his hand, he's going to at minimum have quite a few outs. I'm terrified that I'm about to get wrecked. The small blind has shown tons of strength despite me being able to have some really strong hands on this board as well. I can't get myself to lay down top pair yet, even though there are only 2 cards in the deck that'll make me feel any better. I call, making this already the largest pot that I've ever played at Bellagio. I'd like to see a non-club queen one time. The dealer puts out a miraculous queen of hearts, we smash it just when we need to. The small blind checks. If he has ace-king here, I could get a massive double up. Part of me's wondering if I'm getting trapped by a set or a flush somehow. Should I check this back? What if I jam, get snap called, and lose almost an extra 9,000? I'll almost definitely get called by ace-king and ace-5, so I can't check back. I subdue the fear of worst-case scenarios and announce 1. The opponent doesn't even think about it. He folds the moment my chip hits the felt. There's no way that he had ace-king or ace-5, and likely didn't have an ace at all. He must have tried to pull some type of elaborate move on me with his pre-flop board bet coupled with his flop and turn bets. We were probably ahead the entire way as a huge pot even for this game comes our direction. With this win, we're up $11,000 at the moment. That's the most that I've ever been winning in any session. I couldn't have pictured it going much better than this. Next we've got ace-queen of hearts in the cutoff while the under the gun straddles on. I make it 30. That isn't enough of a deterrent to get people out. The button, big blind, and under the gun all call. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes jack 3 deuce with 2 hearts. We have a flush draw, 2 overs, and a backdoor straight draw. It checks to us. With multiple opponents, I want to make sure that we have the opportunity to see the turn and river so that we can make a big hand. I check. The button checks as well. The turn is the 10 of spades, giving us a Broadway draw. The big blind can't hold back anymore. He bets 80. Under the gun folds. I get the sense that the big blind has a monster. We have a hand with plenty of potential. We call to try to realize our equity. The button folds. It's down to heads up. The river is the 5 of hearts, giving us the best hand that the world has ever seen. There isn't a better one possible. The opponent knows that he's in trouble. He checks himself before he wrecks himself. Make no mistake, he'll still get wrecked though. We make almost a pot size bet at 250. I might play this hand similarly with ace-king offsuit and the ace of hearts. The opponent is tanking hard. He's mumbling to himself. He's probably replaying the action in his mind, and he's thinking that if I had a flush draw on the flop, maybe I would have bet at that point, but I didn't, so he's going to discount us having flushes. Meanwhile, all we're thinking about is Vegas and the fucking Mirage. After almost a minute, the opponent calls. We show him the nuts. We never see what the big blind has. He returns his cards face down to the dealer. It's not the 1st or the 15th, but we still get paid. Moments later, we pick up ace-queen of hearts under the gun +1. The straddle's on. I raise to 30. The player who ran the unsuccessful bluff attempt against us is out for revenge. He 3-bets to 100 from middle position. The opponent's name is Alfonso. He's got a big stack, and he likes to swing it around. Ace-Queen is a bit of a vulnerable hand after opening from early position and getting almost immediately 3-bet. We could be up against other high pocket pairs like aces, kings, or queens. We'd also be dominated if we're up against ace-king. One last possible bad scenario is that we're playing out of position against ace-queen. It's much easier for the in-position preflop aggressor to steal pots against the same hand when neither of us make a pair. Since we can rely on our hearts, I call for 70 more. It's heads up, the dealer puts out Jack-10 deuce with 2 clubs, wrong suit, denomination, and everything. The only thing going for us is that we've got a gutter to Broadway. With clubs out there, we have 3 pure outs to the nuts. I check. I expect the opponent to have hands that have us in terrible shape like overpairs, sets, and ace-king, so I don't even really want to hit a queen, and I don't feel great about hitting an ace either. The opponent puts out a tiny c-bet of 75. Folding is reasonable with so few clean outs, but the other part of me is saying we've got 2 overs, a gutter, and we're getting nearly 4-to-1 pot odds. I also don't think that the opponent would bet this small with a made hand on an extremely connected flop with lots of draws present. Something seems off. It's possible that he 3-bet pre-flop with a hand like ace-4 or ace-5 suited and has taken a stab after breaking. We could potentially have the best hand under those circumstances, or perhaps we can steal the pot down the line if we're up against ace-king. I call one time to see what develops. All we can really do is make the best decision on every street without getting too far ahead of ourselves. The turn is a 6 of clubs, the flush draw gets there. I check because if this is awful for us, maybe it isn't quite as bad as I think because the opponent checks back. With this new information, I'm going to rule out the opponent having all 2 pair of better hands at this point. He would have bet more on the flop with Jack-10 or a set, and almost certainly would have bet the turn if he made a flush. If he has a 1-pair hand like pocket kings, he should be mortified that we have a flush, particularly if he isn't holding a club. He should also be very worried that we'll have either a set of jiggities or 10s. This has gone from a situation that I really don't like to one that could possibly be okay for us. The river is the 5 of spades, it's a blank. The hand that's most plausible that I put the opponent on is either ace-queen or ace-king. We can't beat either of those. We've got one of the worst hands that we'll ever have, but we could reasonably rep a flush, perhaps a set, or even an overpair that we play this way up until now. I want to put hands as good as aces or kings in a tough spot. I make nearly a pot-sized bet of 350. The middle position player started the war with its river bluff in the previous hand, then followed up with a 3-bet over our early position raise. We won the first battle. All that profit and then some will be erased if we get called here though. All we can do is wait. The opponent shows pocket 9s. He's got us beat if he can find the call. He doesn't, he folds.
Alright, we got that one too.
What did you have? Pocket 9. Think me too.
Did you show? Pocket 9s.
Alfonso's a good sport. I personally prefer to call pre-flop rather than 3-bet most of the time with 9s over an early position raise, but there's some merit to taking a more aggressive approach, especially if it got me to fold a hand as good as ace-queen offsuit. It ends up backfiring for him, so we make a move to steal the pot. A similar situation comes up again. The same opponent open limps from under the gun +1. We're in the cutoff as we look down at ace-queen suited. It's a pretty hand that I'm looking forward to playing. I reach for some chips and raise to 200. Rather than isolating the limper like I was hoping, the button calls, so we won't be playing in position. The action gets back to under the gun +1. He takes another look at his cards, decides he likes them, perhaps a little more than his initial limp indicated. He puts in the limp 3-bet to 1200. He's got just over 3700 in his stack. I mentioned previously that this particular player does some unorthodox things. I've seen him put in some limp 3-bets in previous hands. In at least one instance, he folded to a 4-bet. Post-flop, he's been putting in raises at a higher than normal frequency as well. He's certainly capable of pulling some aggressive moves as bluffs. I might have the best hand. I have removal to strong holdings like aces, queens, and ace-king. I don't want to call and have the button call behind me while he's getting nearly 3-to-1. I also don't want to call and have the player behind me fold and be heads up with the player who only has a pot-sized bet left in his stack. The button didn't 3-bet me when he had the opportunity himself, so he probably doesn't have a hand strong enough to call a 4-bet shove. A jam could win at pre-flop, or at least it should isolate the under the gun +1 player and possibly put him to a tough decision. I'm going for it.
Owen?
I rip it for 6,700. It should fold out any pocket pair that the button might have called my initial pre-flop raise with. I wasn't too worried about the button until now because he doesn't give up as quickly as I anticipated. Maybe he suspects something fishy's going on. I really didn't want to get it in for 6,700. I just thought I might take it down pre-flop a high percentage of the time, or at worst, I'd get called by the under the gun +1 player who only has about 3,700. Eventually the button folds. Under the Gun +1 grabs chips and makes the call to risk his entire stack. I'm not too excited to see that, but as long as he doesn't have aces, I should have around 30% equity at worst. We're playing almost an $8,000 all-in pot, and we may need some help. The flop comes King 8-4 Rainbow. Not only do we not make a pair, we're drawing close to dead against aces, ace king, and kings. The turn is the ace of clubs, giving us top pair and reducing the amount of combos that I was worried about being up against, making it more likely that we're potentially all in against a hand like queens, jacks, or tens, which we're beating. The river is the six of diamonds. The opponent doesn't appear to be too thrilled about the run out. I turn over our top pair. Under the Gun +1 sees it. It takes him a little while to process the fact that he didn't win, but he turns over his cards to reveal the same hand. We chop it up. Some players might have folded ace queen suited to a 4-bet jam. It's too bad that didn't happen this time. We would have won 1,500 without seeing a flop. We pick up ace queen suited in the small blind. We're playing four-handed at the moment. The game wasn't great, and several players all picked up at once. Some others took a break, so we're waiting on new players to arrive from the must move. Under the Gun raises to 30. The button is on the pre-flop raiser's direct left. He makes the call. I'm the next player to act. We've got a strong starting hand, and we don't want to play out of position in a multi-way pot. I 3-bet to 150. A re-raise should allow us to win it without seeing a flop pretty often. Not in this case though. Under the Gun calls for 120 more. We'll be going to battle with him. The button folds. We're heads up in a big pot. The flop comes King 10 deuce with two spades. We at least have a draw to the nuts. We'll have hands like sets, top two pair, aces, and ace king in our range. I down bet to 110 so that we can fold out hands like small and medium pocket pairs that didn't improve to a set. I can't imagine getting raised on this board after we 3-bet pre-flop, so we should at least get to a turn frequently if we don't win it immediately with a low risk bet. Under the Gun calls. He could have a king or maybe even a set of tens that he's slow playing. He could also have a draw of some sort. The turn is the jack of spades, giving us Broadway. It's a little bit scary that the third spade is out there. Not all that concerning though, since most of the high spades are accounted for other than the ace. I want to try to get as much money in now as I can because there are plenty of bad river cards that will either kill the action or cause us to lose. I bet 400. The opponent could have a variety of strong hands including flushes, straights, sets, two pair, and top. He calls. I'm going to completely bomb river if it's a blank. Instead, it's the six of spades putting 4 to the flush on board. It's a nightmare river. I check. Our hand has value and beats everything other than a flush. The opponent isn't sure whether or not he wants to fire. Eventually, he comes to a decision and aggressively checks back. I turn over the straight, still not knowing if it's good. Under the Gun isn't happy when he sees it. We never see what the opponent had, but he'd once again tell me that he had pocket tens, this time for middle set on the flop. With this pot coming towards us, we're only down $400. We've recovered $1,600 from the low point, and we're on a roll. We pick up ace queen suited in the small blind. I would have preferred to pick it up on the button rather than have to potentially play out of position. We can't get it all though. I'm glad to have a premium starting hand. I raise to 200. Our boy is in the Under the Gun straddle. He can't seem to beat us. That won't stop him from trying. He calls. I had a feeling he might. We're heads up out of position. Can we hit a royal flush again like we did in the last vlog? No, that'll probably never happen on film for us as long as we live, but the dealer puts out ace 6-5 with two spades. We've got top pair and a great kicker. I check for deception. If the opponent has it out for us like I think he does, he might take a stab as a bluff. No bite. He checks back. We at least gain information indicating that we almost for sure have the best hand. The turn is the Queen of Hearts, giving us definitely the best hand. After improving the top two pair, we can't miss another opportunity to put money in the pot. I bet 200 is a little fewer bet to get the wheels in motion. It shouldn't look too intimidating, and it's not. The opponent calls, maybe drawing dead. The river is the 7 of hearts. Some unlikely straights get there. Really, it's pretty safe though. Given my history with this opponent, I swing for the fences and overbet 1100. Under the Gun has folded the previous 2 times to my river bets. I know it's been frustrating for him. He'll probably feel like he's getting run over if he doesn't call here. I obviously can't have it all the time. And I don't, but I didn't have it the other times, and I do now. Under the Gun pays to find out the bad news. We show him top 2 for a clean sweep and hands played against this particular opponent. He probably called me lighter than usual. He seemed to be a little upset with himself for making the call, and if we pause the video here, we see what looks like a queen flash. There's a good chance that he only had second pair and was attempting to bluff catch. With this win, our stack climbs to over 20,000. We're in for only 10,000, so we've got a 5-figure profit in front of us and a bit of time to add to it. 5 hands later, only a couple players still have the nip buttons, and Robin's one of them. He makes a big raise at 250 from the button. We have a premium hand in the straddle, and we're out of position, so I go with a 3-bet to 1,000. It's 4 times the size of the initial pre-flop raise. Robin wants to get rid of his nip button. He calls for 750 more. It's a substantial portion of his stack. We're heads up. The flop comes Queen 8-4 rainbow. We've got top, and a backdoor flush draw. There's nothing to be concerned about other than maybe being up against a set of 8s or 4s. I downbet to 500 to keep in a wide range of hands that'll be drawing incredibly slim. There's only one overcard that can come out that would downgrade us, so we didn't need to make it much, and this gives the opponent an opportunity to turn a hand like the one that he has into a bluff either right now or on a future street. The button calls, the turn is the king of clubs, it's the worst card in the deck. We get downgraded to second pair, and the opponent picks up a flush draw. I check to see how the opponent wants to play this. The opponent could have a king-queen or king-jack or king-10 suited type of hand that improved to take the lead. He's at least going to rep those types of combos as he bets 2,000. It's an uncomfortable situation. I take a look at his stack to see how much he has total, and then I take a look at him to see if I can get any kind of read. If I think ace-queen is best, I may as well rip it for 3,500 to cover the button because I'm not going to call and then fold on any river for just 1,500 more. My first thoughts are that the opponent could have a king. Then I start thinking that he probably wouldn't have made it so much if he did have a king. It seems like he's trying to get me to fold. The way I've played this hand with a 3-bet pre-flop, a small bet on the flop, and a check on the turn looks pretty weak, like I've got jacks, 10s, or maybe just ace high. My hand is somewhat under-repped. I can't fold every time I've got second pair. The button would have called the small flop bet with a ton of ace-x suited hands that might have improved to pick up a flush or straight draw. It feels a lot like we're up against ace-jack, ace-10, or jack-10 of clubs, and the opponent is trying to get a semi-bluff through. I get a count on my chips just to see if we'd still be winning if we call and end up losing, even though that should never really be a factor in these types of situations. We'll be up 5,000 if we call and lose. If we call and win, we'll be up 15,000. Though I don't really know 100% if we're best, the size of the pot, the strength of our hand, and given how this has been played, all combined, make me comfortable enough to stick around. I go with my read and hope that we're up against a flush draw or worse, as I jam for 3,500 effective. The opponent doesn't snap call, which I kind of thought he might have if he had a strong combo draw or even a hand like ace-9 of clubs. The fact that he pauses to think about it makes me happy. Then, as he calls the shove, I start getting worried that he could have a weak king. Before seeing his cards, if you listen closely, you hear me express some doubt about my read and why I went with the shove.
Brad faded the snap, Rick, is what we like to call that.
We're playing an all-in pot of over $10,000 with second pair as an 80% favorite, and I still don't know what we're up against. We're just going to run it one time. We have to table our hands. I'm not feeling particularly great as I turn over the pair of queens first. The rest of the table is probably thinking that I've got to be behind, but my read on the situation is about to be confirmed. Yeah.
Wow.
While I partially expected to see clubs, I wasn't anticipating seeing 9-3 of clubs. I had actually forgotten the Nick game was on, and Robin still had a button in front of him. If I had remembered, I might have called even sooner. Making the correct call was only a portion of the battle though. Now we need to fade a club on the river. The dealer puts out the 5 of hearts, giving us the win. It's another huge pot that comes to us, and there's a feeling at the table right now that no one wants to mess with me. I've been 3 and 4 betting pretty relentlessly. I've turned hands into big river bluff shoves and shown. I've made massive overbets for value with hands that aren't close to the nuts and got paid off by worse. And now in this instance, I went with my read, leading me to correctly get it all in on the lighter side, winning a 5-figure pot to increase the profit to 15,000. It's been an amazing session so far, and it still isn't over. Next we've got ace-queen suited on the button. Under the gun raises to 30. Under the gun +1 calls. The cutoff calls. This hand isn't terrible to go multi-way with since we're suited. If we make a straight or flush, we'd have multiple players who could potentially pay us off. I try to narrow down the amount of opponents we'll have though. I 3-bet to 160. Casey's given me PTSD as he cold 4-bets to 480 from the small blind. Under the gun +1, and the cutoff all fold. The action's back on us. We're playing deep against an opponent who could definitely be 4-betting light, especially since the situation was set up nicely for us to go for a big squeeze, and Casey knows that. I know that he knows that. I call for 320 more in position. There's over $1,000 in the middle, and we're about to go to battle heads up. The flop comes King 8-3 rainbow. We brick it. All we have going for us is the possibility of hitting a backdoor straight or flush. We could be drawing incredibly slim if we're up against pocket kings or ace king, which will make up a decent portion of the opponent's range. The small blind significantly down bets at 210. It's about 20% of the pot. Is he milking me? Maybe he is. There's still a lot of cards that'll help us improve on the turn though. I can't fold while we're in position and getting great pot odds. I call looking for a club. The turn is the queen of spades giving us second pair. Now we at least beat hands like jacks and tens. The small blind checks. We can have some strong hands on this board like ace king, pocket queens, and maybe even kings. My worry about checking back is that it'll essentially turn our hand face up. Then the small blind can bomb rivers to put us to a really tough decision with only second pair. I bet 400 to take control of the pot in order to check back all rivers and ensure that we get to showdown relatively cheaply. The small blind folds pretty quickly. It's possible that he had jacks, tens, or a small ace-x suited hand. It's a big pot, so it's a good result for us to win it without having to risk too much on the turn. Once we're finished eating, we pick up ace-queen suited. We're first act under the gun +1. We're going to raise this up. I open to 60. The hijack, cutoff, and button all call. This isn't going to be another 4-way pot though. Small blind 3-bets to 310. We're towards the upper middle part of our early position raise. The 3-better is the same opponent that we got lucky against earlier when we drilled the queen on the river to win the all-in. I called, give him a chance for his money back. The hijack, cutoff, and button fold. We're heads up and in position. The flop comes ace deuce deuce with 2 hearts. We've got top pair with the second best kicker. If we're up against the best kicker, we're going to be in trouble. The small blind down bets at 275. Hopefully he'll have some kind of worse ace or something like pocket jacks, queens, or kings. I call. There's no reason to raise and get folds out of nearly everything that we're beating. The turn is the 7 of diamonds. This is always the street that's important because it often separates the contenders from the pretenders. If we see a check, we'll know that we're best, but we don't see a check. The small blind bets 700. It's starting to feel more like we're up against ace king because a lot of the time, smaller pocket pairs that haven't improved will begin to slow down. Still, we can't let go at the moment. I call. The only thing going for us is that the opponent is stuck quite a bit, mostly due to bad luck against us. He could still be a bit tilted and or out for revenge. The river's the king of clubs. It's one of the worst cards that we could have seen. The small blind might have improved to top 2, but even if he didn't, we'll be chopping or losing to every combo that he has containing an ace. Pocket kings improves to a full house as well, but we mostly ruled that out when he bet again on the turn. Small blind has 2 words for us.
All in?
Now when he says all in twice, does that count as 4 words or can we still say that he has 2 words for us? Dudes, we're focusing on the wrong stuff now. We're facing a jam for 1585 and we beat nothing that the opponent is doing this with for value. There's just so much money in the middle already. It's tough to get away from this hand. I know if I call, the opponent is going to turn over ace king. I'm going to be annoyed at myself for calling and giving him almost an extra 1600 for no reason.
Just know it's going to be ace king.
I can't help myself. At least the money will be going back to the guy who got unlucky against us in the massive 5K all-in earlier in the day.
You deserve it. Boom. Chop it up.
You guys did good. I had ace 7.
Yeah.
It's a big chop against ace-queen offsuit that allows us to win all the money back that we invested before the river came out and a bit extra from the people who called my initial pre-flop raise. I'm not sure that I like our river call in the long run, but I'm glad it worked out this time. Today seems to be our day. Next we're dealt ace-queen suited in the hijack. Under the gun limps in. Under the gun +1 is the maniac that I told you 5-bet me with queen-jack suited in a previous vlog. He raises to 50. He just got caught bluffing in a large pot right before, and he seems to be tilting big time. The middle position player is Travis. He's the one who called down the player a second ago to catch him bluffing. He's also the one that doubled up through me with the flush. He calls. If I was in this situation against tighter opponents, I might flat. Here I 3-bet to 200. Under the gun folds. Under the gun +1 calls for 150 more. The middle position player calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop in position. It's Jack, Jack 6 with 2 hearts. Aside from having 2 overs and a backdoor straight draw, we completely brick it. The opponents check. They likely bricked it as well. I might be best. I announce a bet of
230.
I don't know where my brain is because I initially only put out 130. The under the gun +1 player folds. Then I realized there's not enough in the pot.
Is that 130 or 2? Oh, sorry, I said 230. Yeah. I heard that.
This bet can hopefully get a few smaller pocket pairs to fold, and it denies equity from someone hitting any live cards that they might have. It also allows me to keep control of the pot for cheap, so I can check back turn if I get called, and if I decide I want to see a river card for free. If I'm not ahead and get called, I should still have 6 outs. The middle position player matches the bet. We're heads up. The turn is the 8 of hearts. The flush draw gets there. The opponent checks. I could be drawing dead. I check back. The river is the queen of clubs. We drill top pair. The opponent checks once more. I doubt he'd do that with trips or better. I should have the best hand. I put my opponent on something like a small or medium pocket pair below a jack that hasn't made a set. Could be tough to get much value out of those types of hands. I bet 250. It's tiny in relation to the pot, but if I can squeeze out an extra $250 of value in similar situations once every session or two, that adds up and makes a significant difference in the long run. I know this particular opponent doesn't like folding much. He was just seeing hero calling a large river bet from the under the gun +1 player that worked out for him. The one thing that I don't want to see is a check raised. The opponent eventually calls, we turn over our hand, it takes a little while, but the middle position player finally mucks his cards. Ace-Queen doesn't steer us wrong this time. We win a sizable pot to get back heading in the right direction. We're only stuck about 400. The last table of the night, I'm dealt Ace-Queen of diamonds under the gun +1. Under the gun limps in, I raised to 15. Under the gun +2 calls, the small blind calls, and the limper calls as well. We go 4 ways to the flop, comes 10-5-4 with 2 diamonds. We have the nut flush draw, 2 overs, and a backdoor straight draw. Small blind and under the gun players both check. If this were heads up, then I'd bet it. Since we're multi-way, I go ahead and check. It's tough to get through 3 players on a board that typically isn't going to connect well with my under the gun +1 pre-flop raising range. Also, this check is a bit for deception. My opponents may not expect me to check the nut flush draw, so if I hit, it could be easier for me to get called lighter down the road. Under the gun +2 checks back. The turn is a queen. We improve the top pair and top kicker. Small blind checks. Under the gun bets 16. Is obviously very small. I doubt that he would have bet that amount on a draw heavy board with multiple opponents if he had a hand that was stronger than mine. I put in a raise to 50. Under the gun +2 folds. The small blind calls. This is interesting. He probably has some sort of draw himself. The action's back on the under the gun player. He jams for 245 total. My initial read on the situation was that under the gun couldn't have been that strong once he bet 16. I'm still not totally convinced that he is. Either way, I've got a lot going for my hand if for some reason I'm not already best. I'm certainly going to stick around. There's no need for me to re-raise to isolate. I call the 245, hoping the small blind may call as well with a worse flush draw. The small blind deliberates for a bit, then eventually puts in calling chips. Him and I will be heads up for a potential side pot. It'd be great to hit a diamond here on the river, and we absolutely drill it. The dealer puts out the jack of diamonds, giving us the nuts. It's already a large pot, but it could get much bigger if the small blind happened to have hit a flush too. Please pull the trigger and rip it. I can tell he's thinking about it. He finally comes to a decision.
Okay. All in. All.
I don't think that I've ever gotten my chips in faster. I flipped over my cards immediately, so I never saw what the small blind had, but he'd later tell me it was Jack-9 offsuit and that he was attempting to turn his river pair into a bluff. That's a big mistake. Since there was a third player who was already all in, that means the small blind was attempting a bluff to win a dry side pot. You never want to do that since you still have to show down your hand and win against a third player to take down the main pot, which is the only pot with money in it. We capitalize on an extremely fortunate string of events. We're up 2,700 tonight. It's by far the most that I've ever been up and won 3 before. In the first one we'll go over, I've got ace-queen suited, under the gun +2. Under the gun opens to 15. Against early position raises, I almost always flat with this hand. That's what I do here. The cutoff calls, the big blind calls. We go 4 ways to the flop. It's ace-king 7 with 2 diamonds. We've got top pair, top kicker. The big blind and under the gun both check. I bet 35 to extract value from worse aces and to charge draws. Cutoff folds. The action's on the big blind. He raises to 80. It's barely more than a min raise. Under the gun folds. I'm not sure what to make of the bet that I'm facing. The big blind should never have aces, kings, or ace-kings since he didn't 3-bet pre-flop. The best hand that he could have is a set of 7s. He could have ace-7 or potentially king-7 suited. Other than that, I'm going to be ahead. I'm getting a great price. I call for 45 more. We're heads up. The turn is a jack. The big blind slows down and checks. Still don't know if I have the best hand or not. I check back. The river is another jack. The big blind checks again. I don't believe that I'm up against anything too strong anymore. Surely, the opponent would have bet a full house, a straight, or trip jacks if he had something like queen jack or jack 10. I'll almost always have the best hand given the action so far, or I'll be chopping at worst. I have 2 options. I can either bet big to try and get something like ace 10 to fold, or I can bet tiny to get a hand like king 7 that's been counterfeited, or maybe something else weak to call. I go with option number 2, I toss out 50, and a few moments later, we hear something great.
Got counterfeited.
We're not out of the woods yet because the player could still have ace 7. Several seconds later, the big blind reluctantly puts in calling chips. I turn over the ace queen, still expecting that we might be splitting the pot, but that's not what happens.
King 7?
Yeah.
We got a great run out and an extra 50 that we didn't necessarily think we'd get.
Went for the Bradley dollars, bro. Take off. Yeah, to make sure.
40 minutes into the session, we get into the most talked about hand that I've ever played. It starts with Johnny straddling to 20 from under the gun. I'm under the gun +2 with ace queen of spades. I don't see it's a straddle and open to 35. That's not a full bet, so I have to toss in another 5 to complete the min raise to 40. The button calls with queen 7 of hearts. Johnny's getting a good price, so he calls for 20 more with 9-6 of spades. The flop comes jack 10-4, all spades. Johnny and I both flop flushes, and I have the nuts. Johnny checks. I've got my first real decision. I can get tricky and check, or I can bet. I'm not a fan of slow playing. I want to build this pot up. I bet 50. The button folds. The action's on Johnny. He goes for the check raise and fires 175. I don't have a ton of history with Johnny, but in the short time we played together in this session and on the Stone stream, Johnny hadn't check raised or attempted any big bluffs against me. Him and I had played pretty straightforward against each other while mainly going after other opponents. For this reason, I'm thinking Johnny probably has a big hand. I don't get the sense he's bluffing. I take his bet at face value as an indicator he's potentially very strong. If he's check raising for value, he's going to have at minimum jack 10, possibly a set of 4s, or more likely, he'll have a flush since there are a ton of flush combinations in this range when he's getting almost 6-1 on a call pre-flop. My first instinct is to flat and trap him. This almost guarantees that I'll get at least one more street of value as long as a spade doesn't come out on the turn. Flatting is 100% the standard line and protects my entire range, but still, flatting is going to narrow down my range to extremely strong hands. It'll consist of overpairs with spades, sets, jack 10, maybe ace king or ace jack with one spade, ace queen with the ace of spades, and of course, flushes including the nut flush. Because my range will be so narrow, against a really good player like Johnny, I'm worried that he'll be suspicious that I haven't beat and may play cautiously on the turn if I flat. He might suspect something isn't right. I'm looking to play for stacks, and 3-betting the flop seems like my best opportunity to do that. I re-raise to 500. Almost everyone on earth flats in this situation, so I'm trying to get in a leveling war with Johnny by 3-betting the nuts, thinking it'll look more like I'm bluffing. Let's take a look at a hand that I played in another live stream that's a very similar situation. I raise pre-flop with king 4 of clubs, I get called by the big blind who has queen 9 of clubs, and the flop comes 9-8-4 all diamonds. The big blind checks, I c-bet small and get check raised. I sense my opponent is pretty weak, and I 3-bet with bottom pair and no flush draw as a complete bluff. Let's go back to the hand with Johnny now. It's different in that I sense my opponent is strong and I'm 3-betting for value, just hoping it'll look like a bluff. Johnny's in a very tough spot and essentially has to make a decision at this moment whether or not he wants to play for his entire stack because this pot will be huge if he calls. Wouldn't be completely unreasonable for him to put in a 4th bet since this is the best his hand is going to be. If he believes he's ahead, he won't want to see another spade or the board to pair either. Not only is this a tough decision as it is, but there's added pressure of not folding because you don't want to make the incorrect fold on a stream and have everyone call you a nit for the rest of your life. The fact that we've played straightforward with each other up to this point probably plays a huge factor in his decision to fold here, which he eventually does. He makes a tremendous laydown in the spot where a lot of people stack off. All the credit in the world goes to Johnny. I table my hand to show him that I had it and wasn't messing around with him. He shows me his hand as well. I'm surprised to see what he folded. If he had seen me play that king 4 clubs hand in a similar fashion as a bluff, or if he had a slightly better flush, maybe he would have flatted or re-raised. Instead, he makes the correct decision. I certainly could have played it differently myself and gotten a bet from him on the turn if it was a non-spade, but if he's folding to a 3-bet on the flop with a flush, he might have also folded if I raised him on the turn. To get 2 or more streets of value, I'd have had to have gotten a good run out and would likely need to flat both his flop check raise and his turn bet. I don't think there would be any chance I'd be able to stack him, and if we got a bad run out, there's a chance that I don't get any additional value at all. I made a decision that I thought would be the most profitable at the time. Didn't work out. I figure I'll get some criticism, but I don't realize how much there's going to be. Not only do I get people criticizing the play in the chat, but Live the Bike also posts a separate video of it on YouTube later. The comment section of that is pretty brutal. Poker News then puts it on its Instagram. They write an article about it. They then tweet out that article. They then tweet out that article again later that day. And for a third time, several days later, plus there's this caller who says,
Brad played that hand like a bitch, dude. Oh. You don't fucking when you got the nut. What the fuck, dude? Seriously, you call right there, dude. I would have played that hand totally different. If I would have
you definitely would have made more money, probably.
Good times. In this one, we're dealt ace-queen suited in the cutoff. Under the gun limps in. Player in middle position raises to 25. 3-betting or calling both seem reasonable. I lean towards calling because I want the small blind to either call or 3-bet. This is the aggressive opponent who's been straddling every chance she gets. She calls. The under the gun limper folds. We go 3 ways to the flop in position. It's queen 10-4 with 2 spades and 1 diamond. We have top pair, top kicker, and some backdoor draws. Small blind checks. The middle position player bets 25. I don't think he'd bet this small with a hand that has much value, since there are a lot of potential draws out there. I have 2 options. I can call, which might look weak to the small blind and induce her to do something silly, since she's shown several times that she's willing to put in check raises, or I can raise, which will probably cause almost every hand worse than mine to fold. I choose option number 1. It's risky if the small blind flats and the turn card is something like the 9 of spades, for instance. The small blind doesn't flat, she has raising chips, she makes it 130. Does she have a draw? Does she have air? Does she actually have a strong hand like 2 pair or better? There's nothing that precludes aggressive players from actually making hands. It's scary when they run good. She's not the only person that's okay playing for more. The middle position opponent calls the 130. These 2 players have gone to battle with each other quite a bit since I've sat down. My general sense is that the small blind check raised light and the middle position opponent called light, since he's been the victim of several over check raises recently and may be tired of it. If he had an overpair or better, he'd have probably gone all in to make sure that I don't call behind in case I have a draw. If he left himself with 415 behind, maybe he has a draw. Usually, I'm not back raise jamming with top. This seems like a good spot to do it though, especially since I have less than 100 big blinds, as well as backdoor draws to the nuts. We've got 486 total. I announced that I'm all in.
Re-raise. All in.
It's time to find out who actually has it and who's a pretender. It's 356 on top, so not much more for the small blind. She has both me and the other player covered by a lot. If she has a made hand or a strong draw, she'll be getting great odds. It appears that she got her hand stuck in the cookie jar. She folds. 1 down, 1 to go. There's no snap call. The middle position player is getting a really good price. He must not have much going for him. All he needs is 30% equity to make a call profitable in this situation. The way I played it might seem strange to him, so if he thinks that I'm ever doing this with a draw, he almost has to call. As time goes on, I'm rooting for him to stick around more and more. Finally, he makes a decision.
All in and a call.
Alright, let's do this. Keep him low and keep him red. The turn is the 8 of hearts. Fairly safe if I'm ahead. Jack 9 makes it straight though. The river is the 8 of diamonds. If I'm up against the flush draw containing the 8 of spades, that'd be dirty. I'm the one that was all in first, so I show my hand. No immediate reveal from the opponent. That's a good sign. You may have done it, dudes. He checks his cards once more to see if they're different. I'm very much hoping that they're the same ones that he thought he had. Looks like they are. He mucks without showing. Victory is officially ours. Our plan worked exactly how we envisioned it to get maximum value. There aren't many better feelings than watching piles of chips come your direction. Not only is it great to win a big pot, but now I finally have a large enough stack to play the kind of style that I want to play. We've got almost 1,200 in front of us and are up about 700 on the session.